A scientist walks through the slit and the two other men approach the scientist. He brings to an excavation site in the size of football pitch with a massive wing and fuselage visible in the center. They cut through the fuselage of mysterious craft and entered. Inside they discovered the remnants of gigantic frozen ship. One of the soldiers wipes aside the snow, revealing a dazzling red, white, and blue shield encased in ice. Years before at Tonsberg, Norway in 1942, two caretakers of an ancient Viking ruin listen as Nazis invade their village. Suddenly, the front door explodes open, letting in the slew of Nazis agents. One of the caretakers is killed in the blast, while the other begs the soldiers to leave him alone. They ignore the old man and approach one coffin whose lid is too heavy to raise. A black figure emerges from the exploded gateway. John Skimmett, a high-ranking Nazi and a leader of the Hydra group, enters and transverses the chamber, arrives at the difficult-to-open sarcophagus and effortlessly pushes the lid open. He discovers the skeleton remains of an elderly Viking holding a glass cube. Skimmett scoffs, explaining how this cube could be a crown jewel of Odin's treasury if it weren't a forgery. He smashes it on the floor and approaches the caretaker, asking where the real cube is concealed. The caretaker initially refuses, but when threatened with harm to his family, he relents, pointing to a concealed drawer across the room, which is part of an ancient sculpture the size of the wall. Skimmett pries the drawer apart and discovers the real luminous cube inside. Skimmett instructs his forces to shell the city and then shoots the caretaker. At a recruitment facility in Brooklyn, Steve Rogers, a 20-something asthmatic who weighs 90 pounds and 5 feet tall, eagerly anticipates the opportunity to serve in the US Army. The army doctor examines Steve's medical paperwork, which reads like that of 90-year-old man, and rejects Steve's application as the military 4F, as this is his fourth unsuccessful attempt to enroll. Steve goes to the movie and ends up in a fight with the loudmouthed impatient moviegoer who starts ranting at the scene. In the alley behind the theater, the bully brutally beats the tiny Steve, who bravely fights back but is easily defeated. Steve's best friend, James Bucky Barnes, rushes to the alley. He quickly kicks the bully away and goes to Steve, who is irritated that Bucky arrived and dealt with the attacker just as Steve regained his composure. Bucky is now an enlisted guy. His application was accepted and he has been posted to the 107th Infantry. In a joyful mood, Bucky invites Steve to dance with a group of girls on a double date. Steve hesitantly joins in. The four travel to World's Fair in Queens. Steve observes Playboy inventor Howard Stark's botched demonstration of a flying automobile. Steve departs from the group and travels to another recruiting station. Bucky catches up with him and asks how Steve plans to forge his application this time. Dr. Abraham Erskine, who was passing by, eavesdropped on their talk without their knowledge. He is fascinated by Steve's tenacity. Bucky bids Steve good luck with his latest application, and Steve enters the recruiting station for his fifth physical. Inside, Steve sits on an examination table, growing uncomfortable as an MP enters the room, followed by Dr. Erskine. Dr. Erskine has all of Steve's previous application on file. Concerned about Steve's unsuccessful applications, Erskine challenges his character by asking if his determination to apply for military duty is motivated solely by a desire to kill Nazis. The young man truly states that he is not a murderer at heart, but he dislikes bullies regardless of their ethnicity. He also expresses no worry when Erskine reveals that he is German by birth. Erskine is won over by Steve's strong will and persistent belief, so he accepts his latest application. Johann Skimmett brings the light cube to Dr. Arnim Zola, his Hydra weapon specialist, at a secret military station in the Alps. The cube's seemingly infinite power allows Skimmett and Dr. Zola to power unstoppable energy guns and cannons. Meanwhile, Steve has been enrolled in basic training under the supervision of Dr. Erskine and Colonel Chester Phillips. He and his platoon are informed that they are candidates for the government's latest super soldier program. Phillips is underwhelmed by Steve and annoyed by Dr. Erskine's interest in him. During basic training, Steve encounters Peggy Carter, a gorgeous but driven British officer who appears to pity him. Despite being the smallest and weakest member of platoon, Steve generates the greatest spirit, selflessness, and ingenuity. Phillips, still dubious, throws a grenade into a group during calisthenics and they all scatter. Phillips is startled when Steve alone rushes on top of it, eager to sacrifice himself to save the rest, only to learn that the grenade is a dummy. Phillips agrees to Erskine's decision. That evening, Dr. Erskine talks to Steve. Dr. Erskine admits that this is not his first time doing this experiment. He describes how before he immigrated to the United States, Johann Skimmett ordered him to make a serum that would give a man godlike strength. Dr. Erskine developed an early form of the serum he intended to use on Steve. However, when Skimmett injected himself, his flesh rusted away, leaving him as a sinewy crimson skeleton. Despite the risk, Steve decided to proceed with the surgery. The following morning, Steve and Peggy wound their way across Brooklyn. Along the way, Steve shows up at several locations in Brooklyn where he has been beaten up. She wonders why he never fled away. He says that he saw running away as an invitation to greater torture. They made their stop in front of an old antique shop. The two enter the antique shop, exchange passports with the old woman behind the counter, and descends into a secret military bunker hidden inside. Peggy takes Steve to the center of the bunker where they find Dr. Erskine constructing a medical capsule with Howard Stark and Colonel Phillips rubbing shoulders with the senators and dignitaries. Steve is urged to take off his shirt and sit in the capsule. Erskine has made no secret of Steve's sorrow but vows that he will emerge stronger. Carter wishes Steve good luck and joins Phillips in the overhead viewing chamber. Erskine's serum is infused into Steve's muscles and he is enclosed in the Vita Ray capsule. The capsule shines brilliantly. Steve yells in pain but instructs them to continue, and the treatment is completed quickly. When the capsule is shut off, Steve emerges a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier with a solid muscle, which is only the most specific feature of his body artificially raised to the maximum human potential. Everyone, including Phillips, praises procedure's success and descends from the viewing chamber to congratulate Erskine. A single dignitary, actually a German spy named Heinz Kruger, remains behind, placing a little sketch shell on a chair. Moments later, the watching gallery bursts. Kruger descends the stairs and fatally shoots Dr. Erskine twice. He quickly kills the guards and flees into the streets, followed closely by Peggy. Steve tends to a dying Dr. Erskine, who has just enough energy to point to Steve's heart before passing away. Steve rushes out of the bunker in the pursuit of Kruger. Peggy pursues Kruger into the street, effortlessly killing his gateway driver. Kruger borrows a taxi and plans to run over Peggy. Steve arrives just in time, rescuing her from being murdered by an oncoming cab. Steve pursues the taxi on foot, running faster than a normal human and without experiencing the weariness that a healthy guy would. With superhuman agility, he hops onto the taxi's roof, dodges Kruger's gunfire, and the two crash into the Brooklyn docks. Kruger shoots at Steve, who uses the star-imprinted door of the shattered cab as a shield. Kruger rushes to his Hydra submarine, which submerges just as Steve arrives. Steve dives after the submarine punches a hole in the cockpit glass and pulls Kruger to the surface. Kruger informs Steve that he is the first of many and that Rogers can cut off one head but two more will take its place. He then kills himself with the cyanide capsule disguised as a fake tooth, uttering one last Hail Hydra before passing away. Meanwhile, Schmidt and Dr. Zola are visited by three of Hitler's top commanders entrusted with inspecting Schmidt's operations. They mock Schmidt, claiming that the Nazi party no longer takes him and Hydra seriously because of his fixation with magic and the occult, and refers him to as the Red Skull, a nickname Schmidt despises. Schmidt brings the three to his weapons lab and shows them his unstoppable energy weaponry and a strategic map of Europe peppered with targets. One of the three discovers a target flying above Berlin and confronts Schmidt. Schmidt swiftly vaporizes the three Nazi officers. Schmidt reveals that Hydra has split from the Nazi party and has declared war on the rest of the world. The following day, Phillips and Carter collected the remains of Dr. Erskine's lab. Both are depressed because the only person capable of making the serum is Erskine himself. Phillips preferred him to be a lab rat rather than a soldier in his army. Senator approaches Steve with a newspaper article about the previous day's events and a front page photo of Steve chasing down Heinz Kruger. Steve has become an overnight superstar and the senator has a mutually advantageous plan. Steve joins the USO, United Service Organization, and travels around the Midwest selling war bonds and performing musical numbers in a shabby red, white, and blue outfit while carrying a triangle-shaped shield depicting the stars and stripes. He goes by the moniker Captain America, and the performance features theme music made specifically for him, dancing females, and the short segment in which he punches Hitler, whom an actor performs. Captain America becomes an overnight sensation, inspiring comic books and black and white films. His antics generate funds for the USO. When he arrives at the Italian troop, the grumpy, war-torn men mock him and advise him to get lost. He is shortly met by Carter, who informs him that the guys are angry because many members of their division, the 107th Infantry, had been killed in the battle. Steve realizes this is Bucky's division and rushes to see Phillips, who is in charge of the war's European theater. Phillips can't find Bucky's name on his fatality list, so he instructs Steve to return to his work as a movie star and cheerleader. Steve asks Carter where the guys and the Bucky are being held. She shows him a map and a known Hydra weapon plant located 30 to 40 miles behind enemy lines. Steve quickly puts on his Captain America outfit, a blue helmet with a white A on the front. He intends to take a jeep and drive into Hydra's backyard, but she has a better plan. Howard Stark files them both over the battlefield in his private plane. Just as Hydra's anti-aircraft guns start fire on Stark's plane, Steve parachutes in while the other two flee to safety. Steve sneaks into the Hydra facility, eliminating multiple guards in the process. Inside, Skimmed and Zola are creating enough weapons to destroy every capital on the globe. Steve visits the holding cells where he sees hundreds of imprisoned men from the 107th. He releases the men and instructs them to make a messy exit. Under the command of Howling Commandos, the convicts defeat the captors, take firearms and tanks, and flee the facility, destroying much of it. Skimmed observes Steve through CCTV and instantly concludes that he must be Erskine's man. Steve comes across Bucky, who is strapped down to an operation table and has been tortured. Steve also discovers a huge tactical map on the wall, which depicts numerous designated installations. Steve frees Bucky, who is astonished to see that Steve is taller than him, and commits the map to memory. The two proceed up the catwalks and come face to face with Skimmed on the retractable bridge. Rogers hits Skimmed, who surprisingly holds his ground. Skimmed plays with his face, which appears to have detached from his skull, and soon rips it away to reveal a mask. The Red Skull looks back at Rogers and Bucky before quickly entering a lift. In the lift, the Red Skull tells Arnim Zola to meet him at another Hydra base and take his roadster. The Red Skull flees the collapsing complex on the bizarrely designed private plane. Bucky transverses a shaky buckling support beam and makes it to safety just before it falls into the inferno below. With no other choice, Steve backs up as far as he can and leaps across the blazing gap. Back at the 107th base camp, Phillips drafts a note to his typewriter detailing Rogers' disappearance the night before and likely death during the combat. Phillips then chastises Agent Carter for creating his loss, pointing out that unlike the essential Stark, she too can be punished. Rogers comes just then with roughly 400 survivors of the 107th bearing samples of the Red Skull's technology as well as some war vehicles, and they flee the base in a frenzy. Rogers submits himself to Phillips for disciplinary action for going out in direct violation of orders but is excused. Bucky begs for cheering as Rogers truly becomes Captain America, and the success story on the battlefield has spread around the world. Steve provides Phillips and Carter with his best recollection of the Hydra base map and tells them that he intends to go to those bases and destroy them one by one, and that he wants to organize a squad of men from those he liberated in Italy. Steve meets the Howling Commandos at the bar, and they excitedly accept his offer. Stark summons Steve to his weapons engineering lab. On the table, Stark shows various prototype shields with complicated components, but Steve discovers a simple round shield on the lower shelf. Stark adds that the shield is constructed of vibranium, a metal that is lighter than steel, vibration resistant, and capable of absorbing large hits. The shield performs wonderfully in the improvised test. As she walks away, Steve passes Stark a sketch of a uniform. Steve is dressed in red, white, and blue fatigues, wears a blue form-fitting helmet, and carries the newly colored shield on his back. Captain America and his soldiers, including Bucky, make their way across Europe, demolishing Hydra's base one by one. The Red Skull and Zola learn of his deeds and get enraged. Steve and his crew are high in the Alps on a mission to capture Zola on his personal train. Soon, Cap and Bucky are surrounded by heavily armed Hydra soldiers. They narrowly defeat the soldiers, but Bucky is thrown from the train and falls into a cold river below. Zola was caught. Colonel Phillips understands that Zola is simple to deal with because he is the only Hydra agent they have apprehended who has not swallowed his cyanide capsule to avoid giving information. Fearing that the lie may lead to his execution at the hands of the Red Skull, Zola gives in to Phillips and tells him about the Red Skull's lone remaining Hydra outpost. Rogers sulks in a war-torn pub. Carter arrives and consoles Steve at the loss of his best friend. Steve realizes that Dr. Erskine's serum quickly regenerates dead cell, making it hard for him to drink. Rogers and his squad formulate a combat plan to defeat Red Skull at his headquarters. Rogers, wearing a new uniform, mounts a Harley and charges the base. He skillfully avoids Hydra soldiers and tanks before finding himself inside the base, surrounded by a Hydra force. He is apprehended and led to the Red Skull's private weapons lab. A climatic conflict occurs with hundreds of soldiers led by Phillips and Carter storming the base and killing many Hydra warriors. Red Skull retreats to his hangar where a massive flying wing powered by Tesseract is ready for takeoff. Steve tries to catch up to the plane on foot but is unsuccessful. Phillips and Carter arrive in Skull's roadster and the three take off after the plane. Just as Steve is about to climb on and board the jet, Peggy stops him and kisses him. Steve leaps from the roadster to one of the plane's huge wheels. He sneaks into the craft and discovers dozens of kamikaze planes and missiles, each labeled with a different big American city. Hydra soldiers quickly enter the room and Steve engages them, killing multiple men and miniature planes. One of the planes, labeled New York, breaks free. Steve pursues it and manages to seize the plane, which crashes back into the flying wing after flinging the pilot through its rearward mounted propeller. Inside the spacious cockpit, Captain America and the Red Skull engage in a fight. Red Skull fires a cube energy weapon at Steve, who easily deflects the rounds with his shield. A shot is deflected into one of the cockpit's center consoles, which holds the luminous blue cube. The console is damaged, so Skull lifts the cube into the air. Suddenly, a portal opens above him, revealing static space. The Red Skull glows brightly and appears to have disintegrated. His remains are carried away into space. The cube, still shining brilliantly, falls to the ground and burns its way through the plane's hull before crashing into the ocean below. Steve controls the plane and communicates with Carter via radio. Informs her that the plane is on a flying route that will get them to the eastern shore. He informs her that their dance will have to wait. He sends the plane into descent, crashing on a glacier below. Peggy only hears static. Later, Stark finds the Tesseract and rescues it from the deep ocean. Steve wakes up in a 1940s hospital. An old-fashioned radio broadcasts the play-by-play of a Brooklyn Dodgers game. A young nurse who looks strikingly similar to Peggy enters. She waits for Steve's response, who gives her a skeptical look. He wonders why the radio is broadcasting a game from May 1941, specifically one that he knows he attended. She digs into her pocket and takes out a two-way radio. Two tall soldiers in the black uniform enters the room, and Steve effortlessly tosses them through a wall. Steve climbs through the hole and is astonished that the hospital is a movie set. He dashes through the halls, pushes open a door, and finds himself in a modern building crowded with business suits. He exits the building and finds himself in Times Square in 2011. Nick Fury appears and carefully speaks with Steve. He explains that he has been slumbering on ice for 70 years. The hospital set was intended to gently integrate him into modern life. Still bewildered, Steve breathes heavily and tells Fury that he had a date, realizing that everyone he knew in the 1940s was either dead or very elderly. Steve is seen in an old-fashioned gym. He hits a punching bag so hard that he knocks it off its chain and sends it flying across the room. Fury enters the gym and asks Steve if he is having difficulty sleeping. Steve cynically inquires if Fury has arrived on their mission. Fury answers in the affirmative.